Welcome back to another edition of GOAZCATS Arizona Football Preview Show. As always, I'm Troy Hutchison, joined alongside Joe Tafoya, former Arizona legend, and Matt Moreno. And guys, last week, Arizona, things were kind of going good for the offense. Jordan McLeod was getting in rhythm, and then it all fell apart on one single play. Jordan McLeod gets a blindside hit, gets sacked, fumbles the ball in a one possession game, and a potential knee injury that we don't know the details of. He is out for the season, and an ankle injury on top of that. But after that, they went to Gunnar Cruz, and it was all downhill for the Wildcats.
Yeah, it was a rough game. That was hard to watch. It was a home game. The whiteout was happening at Arizona Stadium. Obviously, the big news, Jordan McLeod's done for the season. UCLA, I thought they pretty much dominated both sides of the ball. I know it was close, but it didn't really feel close. They had a pretty equal efficiency running, passing the ball, and they just wore the Cats down. I think, the streak continues, but I think we're in for a very long season. And when do you look at the season and you just ask yourself, let's call this one a loss and we'll start working on the things that we need to work on. I don't know if that happens. It's never happened on a team that I've been part of, but from the outside looking in, I mean, we're kind of at that point. What do you guys think?
Yeah, and it looks like you're back to square one. That NAU game was square one. I mean, it was rock bottom. You start to gain momentum against Oregon. You play well through most of that UCLA game, and then you had the injury, and it feels like you're right back where you started again.
Yeah, well, my thing was like, of course this happens to Arizona. It was just the one thing you can't have happen. They start to feel a little bit better about themselves. They start to, find the rhythm a little bit offensively. And then, this happens. When he went down, it was almost instant. It felt like, just kind of thinking back where it was like, oh, this is bad. He threw his helmet. To me, it's always the reaction of the players. They've obviously seen some serious injuries through the years, through their time playing football. And they were angry. And I said, that's never a good sign. You don't, when you see that, when you see visible anger out of players and we're way up in the press box, we're not on the field and you can see it from that far away, something's really wrong. And I think all of our heads always go to one place when it's a quarterback getting rolled up on. And sure enough, it's a knee injury and an ankle injury. As Troy said, we don't really know what the exact injuries are, but nevertheless, it's a season-ending injury, and Arizona now has to go back to a quarterback that it benched. I mean, there's no way around it. I mean, it wasn't anything else. It wasn't injury related as far as we know with Gunnar Cruz, but it benched Gunnar Cruz, and went to other quarterbacks. Now they have to go back to him. And I think that's going to be a big shift for this team because I thought you saw the momentum, just the team looked different when Jordan McLeod went out. And to me, it wasn't just, that their starting quarterback got hurt. It felt just very different after that. And so Gunnar Cruz is going to have to find a way to get this team to rally around him and move forward from this.
And we saw a lot of we saw a lot of the issues that we've seen from Gunnar Cruz in terms of hesitant to throw the football, and it came true again.
It was interesting also that with a very short amount of time working with Coach Fish, how quickly Jordan McLeod was able to adapt his offense. It seems like, Gunnar Cruz is in a position now where he should have the playbook down by now. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's he's been here for months. It's not like he was here as short as Jordan McLeod is here. Jordan McLeod had to figure things out in a matter of weeks.
Right.
He arrived in the summer and, had to figure things out in a matter of weeks. And he was able to do that. Obviously, he just needed a couple more weeks to get things done. And I think there's been some criticisms of Jedd Fisch and, hey, why did you wait so long to play the right guy? You waited so long to play Jordan McLeod, but for all of us who watch practice, you could see there was a gap between those top two and Jordan McLeod. There was things that just weren't clicking as quickly. It just looked like he was someone who needed some more time and eventually got that. But at this point, there's no more excuses for Gunnar Cruz. You either get the job done or you don't. And it feels like he's had enough time to do that.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what I was saying is that, he's been around the program. Matt brought it up. He's been here for months. I don't know if it's a system issue for Gunnar Cruz in terms of understanding the system. I go back to he's just not making the proper reads, and when he does, he's not getting rid of the football. And again, I don't know how you fix in between the head right there. because if you're hesitant to throw the ball, it doesn't matter what play you draw up.
And that's what my point was. I feel like we're still slow on our reads. We're still missing open receivers. And I can't understand, like, if Jordan McLeod was able to come in and learn the playbook that quickly, is it a mental thing? Or do we have the wrong person? I mean, I don't know what's going on, but all I know is this is what we have. We're going to have to stick with it for the rest of the season. There's no other guy. We're not going to be saved by some other outside guy. And it's not looking good. I mean, this is the type of season that, we're going to have to give Jed a pass on this one. But if this were his second year, like the coach for Colorado, then, we might be feeling a little different about this situation. But right now, yeah.
What kind of impact does it have, Joe, when, you're a guy that you're rallying around, maybe your team leader that doesn't even have to be a captain, but just the guy that everybody says, hey, that guy's different. That guy's leading us to wins. When he goes down with an injury or just is not available, what does that do to the mindset of a team, even guys on defense, if it's a quarterback?
When you're in battle, you try not to think about it and you focus on the next guy up. Next man up is a mentality that most teams carry in the game. When you're out on the field, you don't think about that. The place that it affects you the most is when you go back into the locker room and you go back into training and you go back into classes, and your leader, the one guy that you are relying on, the guy that's been the vocal captain, the emotional captain, whatever it is, if he's not around anymore, there's a void. And once the void is there, someone else or other people fill it, but they may not do the same job. And sometimes those voids, they're left all season long. And it's just, and if you don't have the right personality, if you're trying to replace someone else's leadership with the wrong personality, that's locker room dynamics. You can ruin an entire team like that, even a good one.
One thing that I saw Fish talk about during his weekly press conference, and, yes, there is Will Plummer, and people have brought up the rumors of potentially Jamari Joyner, which isn't going to happen. He shot that down. That's not going to happen. Is that when asked about is Gunnar Cruz the guy moving forward for the rest of the season, his answer was yes, because quite frankly, we don't have that much time left to be mixing and matching players at that position. He's got to get all the reps. I get it. I mean, how can you have a competition when you are 5 games in? You got to roll with what you got at that point.
Yeah.
Kind of to Joe's earlier point, there's kind of no more excuses for Gunnar Cruz. I mean, at this point, you've had every opportunity to win this job. You won it, when they were indecisive at the beginning of the season, when Jed Fish said, hey, we're going with the 2 quarterback system. We all kind of realized that was really picking a starter without picking a starter. And Gunnar Cruz was that guy. Will Plummer didn't play very much in that BYU game. So he's had the job in hand. It feels like the staff has said, hey, here's every opportunity to take this job and to be the guy. And he hasn't done it so far. So I don't think there could ever be any complaints from someone like Gunnar Cruz that he didn't get an opportunity or didn't have chances, because he's had repeated chances to win the job. And now it's in his hands to really try and make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're 0-5 going into the midway point of the season, and we're up for a Pac-12 matchup of the bottom against the Colorado Buffaloes. They're 0-2 in the Pac-12 also. And they're playing an away game. And I feel like if there was one game left on the calendar, you circle that one game, this is it. This is the one chance we have to still come out with a win.
At that, I mean, Colorado, the one thing that they've done all season long, offensively, we know their issues, is their defense. In Arizona, one of the main issues in the game against UCLA was the red zone. It wasn't that they weren't coming away with points, but they were coming away with field goals, missed opportunities. If you're not putting the ball in the end zone, and the one play that they were able to do that was a trick play with a pass from Jamari Joyner to Michael Wiley. If you can't consistently put the ball in the end zone in those red areas, for an offense that's struggling, you haven't scored 20 points in, I believe, 7 games. You got to give your defense something. You got to give your team something there.
Well, and to that point, the defense hasn't ever complained. Don Brown hasn't been like, and not that he's ever going to publicly, but there hasn't ever been that moment, even a hint of like, hey, they're not doing enough to help us. He's continued to stay focused on his own group. And, what they have to do. And so, I think it's at a certain point that's going to start to wear on the defense that, hey, we're keeping this team in the game and you guys have to do something to, get in the end zone. And that's been a real struggle. I don't think that ends this week. I think it's going to continue to be a struggle for Arizona to try and, put the ball in the end zone. I don't know that Gunnar Cruz and when he led that offense at the end of the last game showed me enough to say, hey, that's going to change. They're going to be able to score points, when he's in the game. And I don't know that giving him all the reps during the week is going to do anything to change my opinion of that. So it's going to have to come from within. I would definitely like to see them, lean on the running game even more. I think that you have you have talent there at that position. It'll be interesting to see kind of what Jed Fish and this coaching staff does offensively to try and drop some plays to make things happen and make plays happen that get them in the end zone, because it just has not been easy at all this season.
Well, you brought up the fact that Arizona's defense is keeping them in the game, but right now we're ranked 105 in scoring defense. So the defense hasn't been that great either. I mean, last week we had some good individual performances from one of our linebackers, Anthony Pandy. He finished with a career high 13 tackles against UCLA. He's actually number 4 in the Pac-12 right now as far as tackles go. But we've been giving up quite a few points. And this is a team that we're facing who has some struggles on offense, and they're struggling with their quarterback position. And they're in a position right now where if our defense can come through for us, this is a very winnable game.
And that defense, you mentioned it, gave up over 300 yards rushing on the ground to the Bruins. And they're facing a Colorado team that last season came into Tucson. And I know new staff, new philosophy, new players. You have a lot of transfers on defense. Colorado came into Tucson, and Broussard rushed for, I believe, 200 and something yards against the Wildcats. So you have a guy that's had – sorry, go ahead.
I thought it was 300 yards.
It might have been. I mean,
it was over 300.
it was over. Yeah, I mean, it was a ton of yardage. I mean, they ran the ball all day against Arizona. That was a game Arizona led 13-0 and then ended up losing the game, I believe, 24-13, scored somewhere around there. But you're facing a guy that probably has confidence going up against Arizona, even though it's a new staff.
Well, we're going to talk to Justin Guerriero from the Colorado rival site in a bit. And one thing we talked to him about was they got to be licking their chops. I mean, someone like Jarek Broussard is going, this is exactly the type of team I want to go up against. I've had my struggles this season. I haven't been able to do what I did last year. And look what they just gave up against UCLA. I can do that all on my own. And so I think it's going to be a challenge for Arizona this week, especially up front. You need all those guys to, be at their best. We don't know what the status is of JB Brown, who's another defensive lineman that could potentially help, has some experience. It's going to be real interesting. And I think, that game, it feels like the game is going to be won or lost depending on what happens with Colorado's running game. If they're able to keep Colorado in check, I think Arizona has a shot. But so far, it's been a difficult task for that defensive line and that defense, that front seven, to keep anybody in check. So I think it's just going to be a really big challenge for Arizona this weekend.
Yeah, he was the Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year, Jarek Broussard, and it was 301 yards in a 24-13 win. And rewind a year previous, this matchup was the last time Arizona actually won a football game in 2019 was against the Colorado Buffalo.
I keep wanting to make that storyline happen where, last week it was like, hey, the last home win came against UCLA. Maybe this is going to be the week that Arizona gets win. Hey, we could still live with it one more week. The last win was Colorado. This is going to be the week. Mm-hmm. Maybe it'll happen one day. After this,
it'll work one of these days. But keep throwing it out there.
And ironically enough, I believe at that point in the season, Arizona hit the 4-1 or 3-1 mark after that.
It was a strong season. They were 4-1, 4-1. Coming out of the UCLA game, 3-1, beat Colorado on the road. And then you go, okay, maybe they have something here. And then they really didn't.
And it's been losing ever since.
If you guys don't mind, I'd like to switch gears just a little bit because I feel like, last week's game was really disappointing. Everybody knows the streak's continuing. This week, we're at the bottom of the rung for Pac-12. But actually, there has been some really interesting news happening in the world of Arizona football, and it has to do with nothing that's going on the field. It has everything to do with what's happening in the world of recruiting. And Matt, you seem to know a whole lot about recruiting, but there was a commit or a decommit that came from a De La Salle cornerback, 3-star cornerback out of De La Salle, which is in Concord. One of my rivals in high school, by the way. I used to play them every single
Great
year.
program. They won however many they won for 10 years or something like that.
Game winning streak.
Yeah.
And my high school was one of the ones that they were the last ones to beat them before that streak started. Anyway, Zeke Berry decommitted from Arizona, and there's speculation right now that he might be heading over to Oregon. What say you?
So it was an interesting Sunday for sure. I mean, I think there was that kind of, disappointment that someone like Zeke Berry, who was considered one of the top commits in the class, is still considered a very, very talented recruit from the Bay Area, from Northern California. And I've been talking to people about it all week, and there's no way around it. You can't spin this one and say, oh, but they, we'll talk about the commitment that they got later in the day, but that they got a commitment, so, makes it better. It's a loss. I mean, it's one of the best, it's the best player on one of the best teams in California, from traditionally one of the best programs in California. And so you just can't overlook that. He had the opportunity. I think he was going to have the opportunity to play on both sides of the ball, which would have been very interesting. He's a very versatile player, someone that could have, he plays DB, but he could have played linebacker, could have played that Viper position in Don Brown's defense, could have done some things offensively, playing receiver, a very valuable player for them. But even after he committed, it felt like he was one of those guys that had one foot in, one foot out, was always maybe looking around a little bit. So it's not a huge shock that he decided to decommit. Michigan offered him, I believe, a week or two after he committed to Arizona. He immediately started, having conversations with that staff, talking about getting out there for a visit. Ended up visiting Cal, which is obviously nearby, and took a trip out there after he was committed to Arizona. And then most recently took that trip to Oregon. And so once you start to see these guys take visits, you kind of get a feel, hey, this is not going to last very long. And so it felt like no fault of Arizona's. It just felt like he was someone who, I want to lock in my spot, and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do after that. After I know I have a spot locked in somewhere where I think I want to go.
That's an interesting thought, because mine was the exact opposite. It was Arizona's fault for losing so badly, and for being in a program that's in a situation where we're really struggling. We're having trouble winning.
And I think that's the natural thought. I think there are a lot of people who tweeted at me and said, oh, they lost to NAU, they lost to UCLA. That's exactly why this happened. But if you know the recruitment a little bit, it's not a huge shock. I don't think you can overlook that either. I think that absolutely had something to do with it. Even if it was a small part. I think and that's something I talked about over the course of the summer when they're putting together this class, is losses, hearing that a team is going to lose, and not to say that Jed Fish and the staff was telling recruits, hey, we're going to lose, all of our games this season, and it's going to be a dismal season. But I think there was at least some preparation of, hey, this could be rough. We're trying to implement a lot of things. We didn't recruit all of these players, and the talent level is probably not where it needs to be. So I think they were hearing those things and hearing, hey, this could be a rough season. Hearing that, and then seeing them lose to NAU, seeing them lose to UCLA and continue to lose games, it changes. You're talking about, 17 and 18-year-old kids. They start to hear about it at school.
That's right.
Obviously, Arizona's been on ESPN quite a bit this year. People are just watching those games and seeing, Arizona down big to teams that, that other kids are looking at, and other kids, their friends want to go to school at. And so it makes it difficult. You hear about that at school. Hey, you're committed to that school that lost to whoever. It becomes difficult. And so I think you can't overlook that. I think that does play into all these recruitments. I just don't think it's as big as fans and people on the outside think it is. In this instance, I don't think it was as big. I don't think there was a direct correlation to losing to NAU, losing to UCLA. Hey, I'm leaving that program. I think there was a buildup to this one. But as I mentioned, they got another commitment later in the day. And, it was kind of almost a straight swap.
And he's, in my opinion, I watched some of his film, and Jacob Manu is one of the most dynamic football players that I've seen in a very long time. And I'm talking about, I've seen a lot of talent. We used to play, anyway, Jacob Manu from
Servite. Yep.
Servite. Yeah. Boy, what a linebacker. He's got some incredible speed and instincts. So you lose one, you gain one. I don't know. I kind of feel like,
Well, and the difference being there is one of those guys clearly wants to be at your school.
That's right.
One of the guys doesn't. And so I think that's how you have to look at it if you're an Arizona fan. Do you want the guy who's maybe a little bit more talented, but is kind of half in, half out? Or do you want the guy that maybe is a little bit undersized, plays the game pretty well, produces, and really wants to be at your school and really wants to play for your coaching staff. And so to me, it was as close as you can have to a straight swap in terms of losing one guy and picking one up. I mean, that's anytime you look at recruiting, Arizona's unfortunately had a lot of decommitments over the years, over my time covering the team. And the one thing you look at is it's hard to not look at the decommitment and just take it for what it is. But the other element is who do they replace that person with? And in this case, they replaced him with someone who's almost equally as good. I've seen Jacob Manu play. He fits in very well with what Arizona's looking for. I think he's, if you want to say a Don Brown type of guy, I think he is that. I think he plays with an edge.
Yep.
There's a toughness to him. And as you mentioned, Joe, the versatility. That's someone that can fit into that defense in a lot of different ways. Moving forward, that Viper position is going to be a key position in the defense, and not everybody fits into that role. It's such a hybrid spot that you kind of need a specific type of player. And to me, Jacob Manu said he's not really sure. They haven't really talked about the specific, hey, you're going to line up here in the defense when I had a chance to talk with him. But he says he's open to playing either linebacker spot. But I really think he's someone who could fit into that Viper role because of all those things you mentioned, Joe.
And you start putting him with the other commitments that we've had, which was the quarterback that we brought. What was his name?
Yeah, he's coming with two of his teammates, Noah Fafita, quarterback, and then Kean Burnett, whose dad Chester played at Arizona. He's a four-star tight end. Yeah, and so they have that connection there, and you keep stacking that deck. You keep stacking that deck, and
came out from Jed Fish.
was that a recruiting tweet? I couldn't pick up on that one. It was very subtle.
Well, let's build it up to that. That's what it was. McMillan.
Yeah, T-Mac McMillan. I mean, Jed can only do so many things within the rules. He's not allowed to say specifics about things, otherwise, you get in trouble. But it was very obvious who he was talking about when he referenced, the glass of orange juice is only 3/4 full, only 3/4 full. They're not giving up on T-Mac McMillan, who could very well be the best receiver in the class. He's a program-changing type of prospect. I've had a chance to see him in all kinds of in camps, with his teammates, without his teammates, in games. He's just a different level, and he's someone that if you're Arizona, you do not give up on until he's signed, until he says, I'm going to Oregon, I'm on a plane to Eugene. You don't give up until that moment because, he's special, and he's someone that, he now has 3 of his teammates coming to Arizona. Maybe he eventually starts thinking a little bit more about, playing for the Wildcats down the line.
Well, every single coach in America, every college coach in America is recruiting. It's a nonstop job. It's never ending. And the focus on the future has never been more important than it is right now. And if we keep building the momentum the way that we're building it right now, we actually have something to look forward to. So I alluded to it earlier about this being a year that was, kind of a loss. And what do you start focusing on now? Well, there's something to be excited about right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I still think, and obviously we're talking about this episode, it's the Colorado Arizona episode. And I know Troy, we mentioned it, and as we were talking off air, but their recruiting is not going well, and they're struggling on the field. That's one of those things where if you're Arizona, you at least have something going positively. I don't think anybody, even the staunchest, Jedfish critics, and there are fewer of them, than there were when he was hired. But obviously, a lot of fans don't like what's happened this season. But even the staunchest of Jedfish critics can't, deny what's going on with recruiting. It's improved. It's improved from the last staff. It's not just the numbers. You can look at the talent level, and it's improved. And so that's something positive for Arizona to build around. And that's where it all starts. I mean, it all starts with recruiting. I know a lot of fans don't like to pay attention to recruiting. Think it's overblown, think it's, people like me give them too much credit, too much hype, build them up to be something they're not. But it's what programs are built on. And for Arizona, it's going to start with the talent on the team and the players you're able to get on the roster. And for Arizona, recruiting is going to be very key to this rebuild.
And you know what, 9 times out of 10, when a new coach comes in, and I've been part of many changing of the guards, when a new coach comes in, they want to bring their own guys in, and they're going to bring their own staff. They're going to bring their own players. When I got to Seattle to play for the Seahawks, they had a brand new general manager. He cleaned house, brought the new guys in. We went to the Super Bowl. Came into Arizona with the Cardinals. They brought in Ken Wisenhunt. He cleaned house, brought a lot of guys from Pittsburgh over with him, people that he's familiar with, brought in some new talent. We went to the Super Bowl. So I'm not saying this is going to be like a quick turnaround thing, but for in Jed Fish's defense, I would say that he is doing a fantastic job, because that's a hard thing to balance. I mean, let's face it, this is a full-time job for, anybody recruiting.
Yeah, there's not going to be
head coach of the Arizona Wildcats as well.
There's not going to be a lot of sleep for Jed Fish in the next couple of years. I mean, this is going to be around the clock kind of deal where he has to try, especially with the transfer portal. It feels like every day, especially at this point in the season, you're talking about players that are just entering, and it's going to get to that point, towards November, December. A lot of players are going to start entering the transfer portal, and guys you didn't think would be available, today are now available, and you're saying, hey, I think I can get that guy to come play at Arizona. It could change the roster. So I think that helps a program like Arizona that needs to have kind of a quicker rebuild. You can go get some players that have done some things at a different college. You don't have to wait to see how they're going to react to playing in college, playing at a different level. You kind of have an idea of what they're playing. Obviously, there's a quarterback at Oklahoma who maybe has gained some attention. And could eventually be someone in discussions at Arizona.
They might go and rattle that transfer portal, but we'll leave it at that. No, I mean, Jed Fish has done a terrific job at recruiting, especially given the circumstances right now with the state of the program, with wins and losses, but he's done a great job at that front. This week, we've mentioned it before, they're playing Colorado. Arizona's 8-15 all-time versus the Buffs, with the first meeting coming in 1937, which was a Colorado 1931, which was a Colorado 27-7 victory. And Joe, you mentioned it before, last time out that Arizona had a victory, the last game was against this Colorado team, not exactly this team, this staff, but against the Buffaloes up in Boulder. Arizona won a 35-30 game, 4-1 at that point of the season. And then it was all downhill for the Wildcats. But these two teams have played in some interesting games. You think about that game for Khalil Tate where he threw for over 300 and something yards. And then you think about Khalil Tate's breakout game. He became Mr. October during that month where he just ran all over the Buffalo. And then Kadeem Carey had the record setter in Tucson against Colorado. So these two teams have played in some weird, funky games, and they're both in a really bad position. And maybe it's going to be a great game that nobody expected. Now we are joined by our special guest, Rivals insider for the Colorado Buffaloes, Justin Guerriero. Justin, thank you for joining the show and coming out here tonight.
You got the last name right on the first try. I'm impressed. It's good to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
So thank you for coming, and let's talk a little Colorado football, because we cover the Wildcats here in Tucson. We don't know much of what's going on in Colorado, but similar story to Arizona. They're 1-4. Arizona's 0-5. Two teams have struggled this season. What's been the issue with the Buffaloes?
Yeah, I mean, I really think most of the root causes with how bad this team has been, it's an offensive problem without question. It's a schematic problem. It's a personnel problem. There's a lot of components to why Colorado is sitting at 1-4 right now, approaching the midway point in this season. And quite frankly, this offense just has not been able to do much. And the passing game through 5 games has been largely non-existent. The second-year freshman quarterback, Brendan Lewis, who was in his first season with the Buffs as starting quarterback, he saw a little bit of action last year when the Buffs made the Valero Alamo Bowl, came in, looked pretty good in limited action, but it has just not translated to a smooth transition here in his second year with the program. It's one of those things where you don't need to be a chef at a 5-star restaurant to see a well-done steak in front of you. You don't need to be a trained movie critic to know when you're watching a bad movie. And you don't need to be more than a casual observer of football to see that Brendan Lewis is just not really looking comfortable at the position. I mean, I don't know. Did you guys ever grow up playing Madden and you're on offense and it's a passing play and you pick the receiver you're going to throw to before you actually pass the ball and just kind of see what happens? Honestly, it kind of seems like that's what he's been doing. I mean, when you watch him in the pocket and you don't see his head moving, you see him at the line of scrimmage. You don't see him going through progressions or making reads at the line of scrimmage. Again, it just, even to the most casual observers of football, something's up here. I mean, he's really not looked comfortable back there. The Buffs have not been really attempting anything in terms of medium to long range passes, because Brendan Lewis just, quite frankly, has not shown a capacity to do these kind of things. And with how one-dimensional they've been in the pass game, well, what do opposing defenses do? Stack the box, take away the run. It puts even more pressure on Brendan Lewis's shoulders. And to this point in the season, he's just not proved that he can handle that kind of load. So I think, in a nutshell, kind of just summing up here, the offense has certainly struggled. There's a reason why out of 130 FBS programs, the Buffs are near dead last in pretty much all offensive passing categories. A lot of it is on the shoulders of Brendan Lewis. He can't seem to do anything right. It makes the Buffs predictable on offense. That completely takes away from the run game, which was supposed to be the bread and butter of this offense, given that they have the Pac-12, the returning offensive player of the year in tailback Jarek Broussard. He's not really been able to get anything done. Offensive line has looked mediocre at best as well. So it's kind of just been this perfect storm of just of people falling short and just really just ineptitude all around. But that's kind of the situation at hand that the Buffs are facing. Defense playing decent, not great, not bad, but I mean it's hard to even complain about the defense or put a microscope up to them. With all things considered, is how the offense has struggled so far.
Hey, I've got something, Justin. Thanks for joining us, by the way. Last year, Coach Ken Darrell is coming off of what, all of his peers are saying was a pretty incredible. I mean, it was a very challenging season, but they voted him as the Pac-12 Coach of the Year. So what's the general feeling in the community about Coach Darrell right now, given the current state of affairs?
Yeah, it's definitely souring. That much is for sure. And I mean, you look at the COVID condensed 2020 season, the Buffs start out 4-0, they go 4-2, they make only the third postseason appearance since 2007, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. But I think if you look a little bit closer at how the 2020 season went for the Buffs, if that was a full 12-game season, they very well may have gone 4-8 or 5-7. I think right as that season was coming to an end, they were tailing off. The oil leaks were starting to become apparent. The wheels were falling off the wagons, so on and so forth. And let's also not forget that due to just the pandemic and problems within opponents' locker rooms, the Buffs avoided midseason matchups with USC, avoided a matchup with Arizona State. So just the way the cards ended up falling, I think, ended up being pretty favorable to the Buffs, and they were able to play opponents at the right time, sub in a program like San Diego State at home, beat them. But then ultimately, Utah comes to town for the Buffs' regular season finale, and it's kind of one of those games where the Buffs get exposed. Then they head down to San Antonio for the Alamo Bowl, exposed times 100 against Texas. But I mean, to your original question on how people were thinking about Darrell, it's kind of what you might expect. I had thought personally that how well they did in 2020 in that condensed season was going to set a bar in 2020 that might be unachievable for Darrell, given the deck of cards at his disposal. Just getting back to the quarterback situation that I had alluded to with Brendan Lewis, the Buffs kind of were in a tough spot heading into fall camp. Essentially, their starter from last year, Sam Neuer, a super senior, he transferred to Oregon State in the summer. They also got this kid, JT Shroud, who was a transfer from the University of Tennessee back last January or February. He ends up suffering a very serious knee injury. I can't say 100%, but I had assumed it was an ACL tear during their fall camp showcase at Folsom Field, like the scrimmage that was open to media. So 2 weeks before this season even got started, the Buffs were down to two scholarship quarterbacks. One of them, Brendan Lewis, who had played a grand total of 12 minutes in last year's Alamo Bowl, and the other one being true freshman Drew Carter, who has seen 0 minutes in an actual game. So to Darrell's credit, I think he's been dealt a tough hand in the sense of just the quarterback situation that he had to deal with coming into this season. But with how the offense has performed through 5 games and an inability to score, Brendan Lewis very much looking uncomfortable, an offensive scheme that doesn't seem to fit the personnel, namely Brendan Lewis. I think what's really getting Darrell in trouble with the fan base is his refusal to make substantial changes. I mean, you look across Power 5 football and you see a program like Missouri sack their defensive line coach a couple games in. Ohio State relieving a defensive coordinator of play calling duties a couple games in. Colorado basically couldn't buy a touchdown the last 3 or 4 games, and they just refused to really do anything substantial in terms of switching up the play calling duties, maybe giving this other quarterback a chance to enter games, see what he can do, see if he can spark anything. And Darrell's personality too, I think is kind of working against him right now. I like Karl Dorrell as a person. I think he's reserved. He's not really a rah-rah guy. And that's all well and good. If you're winning games and that's your personality, well, people point at you and say, well, oh man, he's dialed in. He's no nonsense. He's just locked in, laser focused. But when you start losing, then you're aloof. You don't care. So it's kind of just interesting to see how his personality has started to work against him now that the Buffs are losing. But overall, Darrell is definitely, I don't want to say overstaying his welcome, because at the end of the day, for Colorado's athletic department reeling after the pandemic year, Darrell's not going anywhere for a couple of years. Colorado's not going to front his buyout. He's staying put in Boulder for at least the next 2 to 3 years. But I don't think he is very much inspired enthusiasm among the Buffs faithful, just for kind of how he's maybe nonchalantly handled the team's lack of success this year, namely being the boss, being the guy who's in charge. And yet, despite this terrible product that we've seen on the football field, as far as the offense is concerned, his refusal to make any changes schematically to the play caller's seat, and also just to switch it up at quarterback.
I think if you look at both of these teams, Arizona, I think, views this as maybe its best opportunity to earn a win. I'm sure Colorado's looking at it the same. I mean, has that been the sense you've gotten from your side, that this is the game where Colorado says, hey, maybe this is the one to kind of get us back on the right track?
Yeah, I mean, I would preface by saying I don't think there is a coach or player in that locker room who has any right to be arrogant or circle this game in red and say, we got this one. So I don't detect any sort of arrogance or cockiness. But at the end of the day, you have a winless team on the road playing in your house. Absolutely. I think within the program itself, this is probably looked at as the game to get back on track, as opposed to any other down the line for the rest of the season. And at least personally, if Colorado doesn't win this game, I mean, what hope is there that they're going to do any sort of damage against in a road matchup against Cal 2 weekends from now, or playing Oregon State at home? Just if they can't win this upcoming game against Arizona, personally, and I think a lot of people in the fan base would agree, the 2021 season is beyond a lost cause. We're very near that point right now, if we haven't already gotten there. But if the losing streak gets to 5, if they fail to beat Arizona in a relatively favorable matchup at home, then you got to kind of throw your hands up and chalk this season up as a loss on the whole.
So to that end, if you're Arizona right now and you're prepping for Colorado, what are some things that you would exploit if you're the offensive and defensive coordinators at Arizona?
Well, definitely, if I'm scheming up for Colorado's offense, I think you have to attack Brendan Lewis, force him to prove that he can actually sling the ball downfield, that he's a guy who can handle pressure. And basically, if you can continue to make Colorado's offense one-dimensional, which has been the case for the for 4 weeks now, ever since they started playing FBS opponents, things are going to start to crumble for the Buffs on the whole. Essentially, what we've seen is that the defense bends before breaking. Maybe they'll go the first half, maybe they'll make it into the third quarter, keeping the game close, keeping the game within reach. And really, I mean, you look at Colorado's recent losses to Arizona State, to USC. If the Buffs had an offense that was even mildly competent, those are both winnable games going into the fourth quarter. No question about it. But it's one of those things where if an opposing team goes up 10-0 on Colorado, that is like an insurmountable obstacle for the offense. Like that's the status of things right now, as far as this offense's inability to really generate scoring drives and just get points on the board in general. So with Colorado's preseason strength being the run game, and just how much the Buffs' inability to pass the ball has taken away from the run game, I think that's the key right there. Load the box, pressure Brendan Lewis, pressure the offensive line, and get ready for the Buffs to overly over-rely on the run game. Offensively speaking, Colorado prides itself on, as I'm sure all defenses do, but stopping the run first. And over the last few games, that hasn't exactly been the case. USC ran the ball with near impunity before the Buffs went to a bye weekend 2 weeks ago. Minnesota did the same thing. The Buffs had a lot of trouble with Jaden Daniels, just with his mobility and just being a dual threat guy. And then just get it to your playmakers. I don't know if Arizona has any wide receivers on the level of Drake London, but I watched that dude play at Folsom Field 2 weekends ago, and it was one of the most incredible singular performances I think I've ever seen there, perhaps rivaling, although not overshadowing, a guy I'm sure is familiar to all of you, Khalil Tate, his game at Folsom Field a few years ago. That I'm sure will remain burned into the memories of Colorado fans for many years to come. But keys to the game, attacking the Buffs, I really think it more of an emphasis is placed on attacking the offense. If you can stop Colorado's offense, keep them from driving downfield, then really any normal game plan, I think, ultimately will wear down the Buffs defense and just result in the game getting out of hand.
When you look at because we talked a lot about offense for Colorado, but the defensive side of the ball, does it start with Nate Landman, or who is the ringleader of that defense?
Yeah, that's without question. Nate Landman 100% is the heart and soul of that defense. And I mean, whether you talk to his fellow players, coaches, I mean, you could really never tell that dude ruptured his Achilles in early December of last year. He's made the speediest of recoveries, looks every bit of the Butkus finalist that he has been in years past. Nate Landman is the breathing heart and soul of Colorado's defense. And even just looking around Landman, in terms of the secondary, not bad. The Buffs actually have pretty solid cornerbacks. Second-year freshman Christian Gonzalez and then Mekhi Blackman, both of whom were tasked at different times with covering Drake London a few weeks ago, both of whom provided more or less white-on-rice coverage, and both of whom ultimately were just mossed, out-physicaled, whatever you want to call it. Again, Drake London just had an absolutely crazy game, and no matter how well Colorado's DBs played against them, nothing seemed to go their way. But front seven-wise, the Buffs have a returning senior, Mustafa Johnson. He's been a mainstay nose tackle for the Buffs for a number of years, but last winter, so this would have been like January or February of last year, he declined to go through with his COVID freebie year of eligibility and instead declare for the NFL draft. Didn't really get much attention. I think he worked out with the Jets, but abruptly news broke a couple weeks ago that he had rejoined the program, was serving a suspension, and he made his debut against Southern Cal a few weeks ago. So having him back in the fold definitely adds some experience and anchor to that defensive line. The front seven, generally speaking, aside from Mustafa Johnson and Nate Landman, has performed pretty admirably. Again, in recent weeks, they've been gushed somewhat with the run game. But the Buffs have a couple of transfers at linebacker. Jack Lamb they got from Notre Dame, and Robert Barnes is an Oklahoma grad transfer. They've been used somewhat sparingly, but are adding a pretty solid veteran presence to that group. And so I think overall, I'd sum up my thoughts on the defense being that they have a good group of guys there. There is talent there, but they're mortal at the end of the day. Nate Landman, I think, had a great quote that stuck with me. It was after the Buffs had lost to Texas A&M. And to summarize briefly that game, it was the second week of the season. Texas A&M's ranked number 5 in the nation. They come out to a neutral field in Denver, in Power Field, where the Denver Broncos play. And the Buffs are leading them 7-3 going into the final minutes of the fourth quarter. And A&M ends up scoring a touchdown with like 2.5 minutes left in the game. 10-7 is the final score. And Nate Landman had kind of looked to us media after we grabbed him in a scrum outside of the locker room and was kind of just like, look, you can't 3 and out in opposing offense for 4 quarters. It's just, you can't do it. It's not a realistic expectation. And that, I think, kind of embodies the position that Colorado's defense has been in this year. The fact that the offense has just not really given them much support whatsoever. Those guys could be one of the top units in the nation, and still the Buffs will be losing games just because the reciprocal complementary football I don't think is there. So I have respect for Colorado's defense. There's veterans within that group. They have a solid secondary. They have played good, not great, through 5 games this year. But really, I think the ineptitude of the offense has overshadowed anything positive that they have done as a collective unit.
So
when you follow your team, you follow all of their weaknesses as well.
Yeah.
Justin, you've done a great job of explaining what's going on over there in Colorado. Definitely appreciate you joining us today. When I was in college, 1996, much earlier than the Madden days, I was back playing Tecmo Bowl. you referenced Madden earlier, so I played Tecmo Bowl. Rick Neuheisel was the coach at Colorado.
Yes.
And that was my number 1 choice for school, and they never even sent me a letter.
Wow.
I was a 5-star linebacker out of the state of California, blue chip All-American. And it was the school that I wanted to go to. They never even sent me a letter.
Really?
So, Justin, again, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you jumping on here and sharing your thoughts of Colorado, giving us the inside info of what we need to know, because I couldn't think of a better person to tell us anything about the Buffs besides you. But thank you for jumping on, and we really appreciate you. If you want to, just give out a shout out or two, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. And Matt, it's I know we've interacted, we've sent some Q&As back and forth together over the years. So nice to virtually shake hands with you.
Of course.
And Troy and Joe. It's the same to you guys. It's nice chatting. But yeah, if any of your subscribers or viewers or followers want to shoot me a follow on Twitter, I'd super be appreciative. It's at Guerrero, Guerriero, capital C, capital U on Twitter. And yeah, I'm the managing editor, the men's basketball and football beat writer for Colorado's rival sites, which is called CUSportsNation.com.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you taking some time to talk with us, bringing us a ton of insight. It's going to be, I think, an interesting game for all of us. We'll see what happens, but I appreciate it.
So, keys to the game for Arizona. I have a few of my own. I think Arizona needs to get rid of the ball, and specifically Gunnar Cruz. Just don't hesitate. Fire the ball. I feel like we say that all the time when it comes to Gunnar Cruz. Just let it fly. Trust your instincts. Get it to your receivers. Stop the run. Colorado, like we said before, Broussard ran for 301 yards against Arizona. Different Arizona team, different Arizona staff, but same running back who's had a tough year that I'm sure is relishing at this opportunity. And then lastly, battle of field position. These are 2 teams that offenses has struggled. Defense for Arizona has looked improved, struggle at times. Colorado's defense has looked really good at times, but unfortunately is hindered by their offense. So if you can win the battle of field position, you might be able to win this game. What are some keys in your guys' opinion?
Keys for me, and it's been a consistent theme all year long, is that we need to learn how to finish. We got to finish the plays. We got to finish the drives. And when we're in the red zone, we got to find the end zone. It's been a big problem. Those third downs, turning the ball over in critical situations. finish.
I would only have one, whatever it takes. I don't think you could be too prideful to try anything different, to do some things that maybe other coaches would say, I'm not going to try that. Jed Fish has been open about, hey, I'm willing to try some trick plays and do some different things. At this point, you just need a win. This could be your last opportunity, real strong opportunity to get a win this season. To me, it's whatever it takes. Whatever, if you need to pull out gimmicks, I think you can't be too prideful for that. If you need to, throw some different players in there that we haven't seen yet to give them a shot, I think you have to do whatever it takes if you're Arizona to leave Boulder with a win, because I don't know that they're not going to be favored in any other games this season. They're not favored in this one, but it's at least a manageable team, a team that is struggling in its own right. And for me, if you're Arizona, I think you need to do whatever it takes to leave that city with a win.
We've broken down Colorado. Justin was kind enough to give us players to watch on that side, for Colorado. Who are some guys that you guys would pick for key players to watch for Arizona in this matchup?
Oh, man, I'm going to say the same thing I've said the last couple of weeks, and his name is Stanley Berryhill. And let me tell you, Stanley right now, only his mom calls him Stanley. I'm going to call him Stan. Stan is on pace to break Bobby Wade's record for catches in a single season. And that number is 93. He's at 40 right now. And he's just one of those players that's like consistent over and over and over. So Stan Berryhill. And when you start mentioning guys like Bobby Wade and Dennis Northcutt and Michael Thomas, these are all NFL caliber players, guys that they were drafted in the second round, the third round, and the fourth round, had long careers in the NFL. We quietly on our team have a guy who's having a career season right now, and it's being overshadowed by this incredible losing streak. So Stan, I'm with you, my man. We'll keep watching you. Another guy who also is one of our cornerstones on offense, and thankfully we're getting this guy back next year, is Donovan Lay. He's been consistently one of our best players. And I think, we gave the offensive line a lot of they were the most, they needed to have the most improvement. And I would say that one of the most improved players on our offense is Donovan Lay. So congratulations to him. We'd like to keep going. And he's another guy that you can build a program around. And then Anthony Pandy, I mentioned him earlier. He had 13 tackles against UCLA. We're going to need all of that this week. He's also a junior, so he's coming back next year. Can you see the theme here, guys? I keep moving towards the next thing. Let's move to next year. Let's finish this year, finish strong, but then move on.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a couple players that I'd like to see do more, starting with Stevie Rocker. We had an opportunity to talk with him this week. He's kind of getting a little bit more involved in the offense at the running back position. I do think Arizona's running game is going to be what paces it the rest of the season if it is going to be Gunnar Cruz. I mean, barring Gunnar Cruz really taking a big step forward the rest of the season, I think the running game is what's going to have to lead Arizona. There's a lot of talent at that position, and he's someone who can kind of factor into the running game, but could also catch some passes and do some strong things in the passing game as well to help out, Gunnar Cruz and give him, someone to check the ball down to and have an opportunity to make some plays. So he's one. Isaiah Rutherford is someone who missed this last game, who it'll be interesting to see if he's able to play. It sounds like he's going to be good to go. I think I'm still just waiting. He's almost kind of like the new Jalen Harris for me. I know we usually bring up Jalen Harris in this segment, and we always say this is going to be the game that he breaks out and has the big game. He's kind of the new Jalen Harris for me, where and maybe it's because he's a corner. If he's doing his job, you don't hear about him, you don't hear from him, which he's done a lot this year. But I really want to see him kind of really break through and be that guy that everyone knew he was coming out of high school, the guy that had every offer and ended up playing at Notre Dame. So. That's another guy. And then I think Gunnar Cruz is so much is going to be on his shoulders. I know it's an easy pick, but he has to do something to get the team behind him, to get the fan base behind him, because when we left the stadium last week, there's a lot of bags on heads, which is not what you want to see. There were a lot of paper bags on heads. It was no fun to see that. It's not what you want to see if you're a player. They need something to kind of rally around, and I think it has to start with that quarterback position.
Yeah, I think Gunnar Cruz is the obvious pick, but I'm going to go with the guy calling the plays, which is Jed Fish. I mean, he alluded to it in the press conference, trying to get things going for Gunnar Cruz. When he was asked upon that, he talked about that up-tempo offense, getting him quick hitters, quick in rhythm. I think it's up to Jed Fish to get him in those situations. Try to design some plays that he'll succeed in, because if he's holding on to the ball too long, waiting for plays to develop, I think you're only asking for trouble. So I'm going to go with Jed Fish and his play calling this game. That needs to be a focal point. The offensive line, you mentioned Donovan Lay, and I think the whole line's improved from the beginning to the end. Well, to this point in the season, I should say. You're facing a Colorado team that has a really good front seven. Mustafa Johnson's coming back, as we found out. So it's going to be up to them to create that push. I think you're going to see Arizona run the ball a ton. So get those holes open for the running backs. And then lastly, Travion Mason and Keon Bars, I'm going to pair them together. Colorado struggled offensively, and it starts at that quarterback position. Not only have they only averaged 100 yards passing this season, he's been sacked. Lewis has been sacked 15 times. So I don't know if that's a product of him running into trouble, not releasing the ball like Gunnar Cruz, or the offensive line's just bad. So it's going to be up to the middle of this defensive line, because we always say Jalen Harris, he'll be there on the outside. But if you can get pressure through the middle, I think that's going to spell success for Arizona. Those are my three players and coach to watch for this game coming up.
I think an X factor that you mentioned earlier in the show, Jamari Joyner. If there's anybody who's maybe like Khalil Tate the most on this roster, is Jamari Joyner. So maybe Arizona says, hey, you remember this guy? The ghost of Khalil Tate is back, and maybe they try and do some different things with him. But
you got an honorable mention there?
Maybe an honorable mention, an X factor.
Wild card.
Yeah, wild card. But I mean, he hasn't played a whole lot this season. It'll be interesting to see if they get him in the game and how they use him and how he kind of, makes an impact. But he's the most like Khalil Tate, and Khalil Tate very much, I think, is a hated man in Boulder, Colorado. And they, as we heard from Justin, they still very much remember him, are very happy to not have to be playing him.
Well, if I have an honorable mention, since we're doing honorable mentions, I'll pick Troy's guy from last week, Booby Curry. He had 6 catches, which is a career high for him. So nice job, Booby.
Yeah, and I guess I'll go with one. Some guy that created a pick. You started a theme, Matt, so we got to go with it.
We're changing things as we go here.
Yeah, Gunnar Maldonado. He came up with the interception against UCLA at the end of the half there. Some issues there at the end of the half. They couldn't come up with points, but he was able to pick off Dorian Thompson-Robinson, which that guy doesn't throw a lot of picks. Safeties have been getting killed a little bit during the season. We've seen progress at that position. Can he continue the interception and build upon that? I'll look to him to have maybe a big game for Arizona. Yeah, somebody will walk away with a victory this week. We'll find out who it is. But as always, thank you for joining us, and be sure to check out our website, GOAZCATS.com. Check us out on Twitter. Follow us during the game for live updates, and we'll see you next time.